Hello everybody. Today we're going to talk about work in adolescence and emerging adulthood. So teenagers today, American adolescents spend more time on leisure and less time being productive than adolescents in other countries. So American students spend less than 5 hours per week on homework on average. In Asian countries, they spend about 4 to 5 hours per day on homework. So that's a fairly big difference. Adolescents may have too much unstructured time in which they often choose unchallenging activities, video games, hanging with friends, things like that, TV. Structured activities may foster adolescent development in a more positive way. So things like music, athletics, academic clubs, etc. So before 1900, adolescent work in the West. So the 17th and 18th century, boys tend to work on farms, girls cared for domestic animals and did household work. Then in the 18th to 19th centuries, when industrialization occurred, adolescents worked more in factories, coal mines, processing plants. Farming work declined. But work in these factories and plants and mines were long hours, very dangerous conditions, and lots of health hazards. In terms of the student worker, before 1925, most adolescents entered the workforce by 15 years of age. But then, adolescents were either students or workers, but really not both. Then, between the 1940s and the 1980s, the proportion of high school students with part-time jobs started to rise quite dramatically, and new jobs were created in retail and services where there were shorter shifts, lower wages that adolescents tended to work at. By 1980, part-time work had become really typical for American high school students. First jobs, American girls typically is babysitting. For American boys, typically is some kind of yard work. But by the time students are in high school, many are involved in either restaurant work or retail work. And their average employment is 15 to 20 hours per week. The work tends to be somewhat repetitive and monotonous. Most don't see the job, their first kind of like high school jobs, as the basis for their future career. It's just a job for now. In terms of research on work and psychological functioning, working up to 10 hours per week isn't related to any kind of increased negative symptoms and has little effect on sleep. But for adolescents who work more than 10 hours a week, because of course they're also going to high school, we see that there's more of a chance for disrupted sleep, eating, and exercise. Adolescents who work are more likely to use alcohol, cigarettes, or other drugs. Researchers disagree if there's a correlation or causation. So does it happen that adolescents that tend to have part-time jobs also tend to use alcohol, cigarettes, or other drugs correlationally, or is there a causal effect? And in terms of occupational deviance, kind of acting out at work, we see that in more than 60% of adolescents. Why? Potentially boredom. They really don't have much personal investment in this job, and oftentimes little supervision. You can look at these numbers in your book, but just kind of interesting in terms of costs and benefits of adolescent work. So here are some of the benefits. We see more responsibility, money management, learning social skills, work ethic, independence, time management. But problems, work leads to less leisure time, lower grades, less time for homework, thinking about work during class, and fatigue. So preparing for after high school, transition to work. Your book talks about this term, the forgotten half, or those who are not attending college. So there's been a loss of some higher wage sectors of work for those not attending college that has led to a decline in income for high school grads who are not attending college. And there are really new basic skills that we need in order to work in our new, more information-based economy instead of factory work and working in plants and things like that. Really, what's necessary is reading and doing math at least a 9th grade level or higher, being able to solve semi-structured problems, communicating effectively orally and in writing, being able to use a computer for word processing and other tasks, and being able to collaborate in diverse groups. This is kind of the new skills that we need to be sure that high school graduates are equipped with. In terms of developing occupational goals, Donald's super theory talks about this process of crystallization, 14 to 18, so sort of during the high school years, starting to learn about interesting occupational fields, then specification, focusing on specific occupations, beginning to pursue the education one would need for that occupation, implementation, 20 to 21 years old, starting to enter the job itself, stabilization, 25 to 35, establishing yourself in a career, and then consolidation, seeking advancement in that chosen career. Interestingly, most individuals change their career at least once. I think there's sometimes a thought that you pick your career and you stick with it for the rest of your life, and that is not true in my own personal experience, and certainly research shows that as well. So my husband, when I met him, was a video game producer for Sony, and now he's a high school teacher. So people change jobs and careers quite commonly in adulthood. And what influences occupational goals? Your personality. And your book talks about these 6 categories of personality characteristics that might influence the choice of job that you would pick. And obviously, there's a variety of personalities in one occupation. So just because you're social doesn't mean there's only kind of one career path for you. We can see social people in many different occupations. In emerging adulthood, individuals start to seek identity-based work, so looking for a job that will lead to personal fulfillment. It's kind of our thoughts about jobs as we're entering the workforce, right? What is it that I'm going to do that's going to make me happy? What will make me fulfilled as a person? But it's really a long, winding road to get there. The average American holds at least 10 jobs between 18 and 30 years old. And then the idea of exploration versus meandering. So exploration being systematically changing jobs to sort of figure out what you want to do, versus meandering or floundering, just finding any job to pay the bills until something better comes along. Maybe sort of disappointingly, the majority of adults never find that identity-based work they seek. Very often, eventually people end up finding a job that works for them for many reasons. It might not fulfill kind of all their hopes and dreams, but it works for them and their life. So let's see. On that note, I think we are finished with this chapter. Thanks.